Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Oxfordshire ESF Reserve Fund Supplier Briefing, led by OxLEP. My name is Ahmed Goga. I'm the Director of Strategy and Programs at OxLEP, and I'll be taking you through the briefing. I'll also be supported by my colleague, Joanna Wright, who's the Programme Manager for ESF at the Managing Authority, the Department for Work and Pensions as well. And between us, we'll walk you through some of the key points you should be thinking about in preparing your tender, and then we'll move on to some more detail as well. There's a few things to cover, so let me take you through those. We're going to provide you some strategic context for Oxfordshire and its economy and its labour market. We're also going to share with you a little bit more detail about the Oxfordshire Recovery Plan, of which this particular call is such a key feature. Then we'll talk a little bit about what we're looking for, and then also cover some technical matters. And then we'll have ample time for Q&A and an open discussion on anything that you've heard during the course of the briefing. A few house rules just before we start. First of all, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat bar. My colleague Rob, who is driving the presentation, will pick those up and then we'll share those as part of the discussion. Of course, you'll be muted at the moment, so don't worry about whether or not things are clickable on your panel. You should be able to fill in the chat bar without any problems, but there is a contact host function as well if there are any technical issues as well. We've got an hour, but we hopefully will be done before then, but we want to maximize the amount of time we have so that you are fully appraised on what we're looking for and that you're also clear about the sorts of things you need to be putting into your tender in order to put forward a strong proposal, which we are sincerely hoping we get many of as well. So we're going to get into the detail now, and we'll walk you through some of the key points to begin with, and starting with Oxfordshire's strategic context. Now, the starting point in of this whole process, I think it's really important to understand where Oxfordshire is as a location and what we're doing as a group of partners, of which OxLEP is a key participant. One of the big things that we're seeing over the course of the last few years, driven by a strong partnership approach, is an alignment between our economic, spatial and infrastructure priorities as a group through the Oxfordshire Growth Board, but also bilaterally through relationships with local authorities, our business community, our universities and science community, amongst many others as well. And this is all based on the strong positioning we're taking in reimagining Oxfordshire's role in the UK economy and into the international economy, recognising our leadership role within the UK as a strong driver of growth, of creating jobs in supply chains, and also creating pioneering R&D, which translates into new flourishing companies that create then manufacturing and other jobs in other parts of the country as well. And all of these strategies are aligned around that very coherent vision and clear long-term plan. At the heart of it is the industrial strategy, the Oxfordshire Plan 2050, which is the statutory spatial plan, which will guide development across Oxfordshire. And then finally, the infrastructure strategy, which underpins the key and essential digital, physical and social infrastructure that will be needed to make sure Oxfordshire achieves its ambition to be a top 3 global innovation ecosystem. And all of the strategies you see on the slide are all lined up behind that, including, as you can see there, the skills plan that's recently published and the economic recovery plan. And also we play a key role in driving the development of the Oxfordshire-Cambridge ARC, and we are strong leading advocates in that work as well. Next slide, please. Just wait for this to click through. So it's worth reflecting on some of the investments that we have been making into Oxfordshire's skills and education system. And that's an important thing to reflect on when you're preparing your proposal against this particular tender. Over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, OxLEP and other partners have together put substantial money into the skills infrastructure in the county, and it's been across a range of platforms and providers as well. Just a few that you see here, including new advanced engineering technology facilities at Activate College in Blackbird Leys, particularly to support people who are furthest from a labour market or in deprived communities, and also to work more closely with employers. Investments in the centre there at Aberdeen and Whitney College, a new advanced skills centre, and also a new apprenticeship facility at Culham, which is at Oxfordshire Apprenticeship Services, OAS, to the left. There's also major investments with our businesses and universities and community organisations to really advance aspects around clean growth. So in the top right, you see the Earth Lab, a partnership with the Earth Trust in South Oxfordshire, which is really advancing thinking in clean growth and developing new opportunities, connecting young people to the development of jobs that are going to be in the clean technologies. At the bottom there, you see the Bicester Eco Business Centre, the first zero passive house commercial building in the country, which is a flagship part of the Eco Town at Northwest Bicester in Elmsbrook. And to the top left, in life sciences, we've been working very closely, as we all know, with our partners at the University of Oxford and also Oxford Brookes in developing additional world-leading facilities around the bioescalator at Headington, the clinical biomanufacturing hub, and also facilities around the Wood Centre for Innovation, and many others that really are driving forward the world-leading life sciences cluster that has been at the centre of developing the new vaccine with AstraZeneca as well. So you can see significant investments across the whole spectrum of skills that are going to be vital in increasing business engagement and also driving new pathways for local residents to access jobs as well. And we'll speak a little bit more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. I think it's also worth understanding Oxfordshire as a place and its economic assets when you're looking at preparing your proposal as well. And this is part of the unique aspects of the county and its economy and why it's so critical to the UK as a whole. Every part of the county is covered by very key densified economic and science hubs from the north to the south and east to the west. And each one of these blobs has substantial capability and a broad range of business activity on them. And the sheer density of this activity illustrates that the county has such a key role in sectors ranging from life sciences, as I've mentioned earlier, and clean technology, but also to our advanced engineering and high performance manufacturing technologies, which are at the heart of the Motorsport Valley and our F1 heritage. Also in emerging technologies around around quantum computing, and also in areas like digital and creative, as well as huge opportunities that continue to be evolved around advanced engineering, linked also to the transition to e-technology and the move to esports as well. So each of these areas covers significant economic activity and also growing new opportunities as well. And it's going to be really important that this proposal that comes forward is meeting those opportunities that are being created across the ecosystem in all parts of the county as well. Next slide, please. And to illustrate the difference in our economy compared to many other parts of the country, this is just one example of many that illustrates how our economy is evolving and accelerating. The number of spin-out companies coming out of the University of Oxford, for example, is accelerating at an exponential rate into COVID and out of as well. You can see this huge explosion of activity, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, as the number of businesses coming out and being established grows year on year. And each one of these companies is then growing at an exponential rate of somewhere between 15 to 25% a year. And that means that there are new jobs being created within those businesses, new skills needs, and also therefore new employment opportunities as well. And those aren't just going to be within the lab. Many of these companies start to develop other requirements and other skills priorities around sales, around front of house, but also in areas around finance and customer service as well. And that's one of the key aspects around the uniqueness of Oxfordshire's business space as it continues to accelerate. We expect the university to generate at least another 20 spin-out companies over the course of this financial year alone. That's despite the challenges that COVID has created as well. And each of these businesses, as they evolve, are growing at a rate that will mean that many of them will reach substantial large business status. Companies that are familiar to us at the moment, such as Oxford Nanopore, for example, was started as a spin-out company with 2 chemists in a lab. It's now employs 800 people. It's worth over $1.5 billion, and it's got a new HQ at Harwell. And there are many other examples of these that are in and across Oxfordshire, and we see more coming as well. Arrival in Bicester is another example, which is now reaching substantial market capitalization in the clean technologies as well. So there are huge skills priorities that are emerging as a result of this growth, and it's not going to slow down, it's going to accelerate, and the vital part is going to be to ensure that they have the access to talent that are enabled to continue to flourish and function as well. Next slide, please. So that's a quick potted history through the strategic context for Oxfordshire. What we're going to do now is talk a little bit about the economic recovery plan, which provides the framework for some of the work that this tender is going to be responding to as well. So the recovery plan was prepared by Oxfordshire partners. It involves a number of leading local authority, university and business leaders who've come together to develop this under the aegis of the OxLEP board and the Oxfordshire Growth Board. It's a live document, so it's continued to evolve, and it's going to remain agile. We've got a dedicated economic baseline that underpins the plan, and also an update on its forecasting for how the Oxfordshire economy is going to adapt over the course of the next 12 months in 2021 as well. It's been informed, as I said, by a number of different leaders and experts as well, so it's very tuned to what we think the Oxfordshire economy needs. And it's a near-term plan, so it focuses on the next 2 to 3 years in the first instance, and it complements activities that are sitting alongside it, the longer-term plans around the industrial strategy and others that I mentioned earlier. What it's also aiming to do is look not just at the resilience of the Oxfordshire economy and strengthening it, but also looking at how we can strengthen particular areas that the economy needs improving that COVID has highlighted as well. And we'll touch on those in a minute as well. And it's aligned to a system-wide approach alongside other COVID plans, specifically around public health and also community planning and also resilience fora that we do in partnership with some of the other bodies responsible for statutory functions as well. Next slide, please. The plan has 4 components. It includes activities that the industrial strategy and the supporting investment plan has identified, but particularly the ones that we can bring forward much more quickly and that focus on labour market and also on sectors such as the arts and the visitor economy, which have been particularly challenged, and we'll say a little bit about that in a minute. It also encompasses making better use of activities and investments that we already have in the system, and that includes those skills projects I touched on earlier, how we can make those more effective in ensuring that people who need to develop skills or businesses who want to strengthen their workforce planning can access those facilities and ensure that the services that they offer meet the new needs of the business community in Oxfordshire and the economic priorities that they now have. It also identifies making good use of response measures that are already being drawn down through OxLEP and our other partners. That includes things like the Getting Building Fund, where we have a business investment fund worth over £4 million that's helping businesses to accelerate investment in their business operations to help them prepare for new competition and also to secure market share in growing markets as well, amongst other things. Also projects that are supporting town centre renewal as well. And then finally, the 4th component of the plan are specific areas that we feel we need to give more attention to and secure additional funding, which the baseline assessment has identified require that level of investment as well. So those 4 components together make up the recovery plan. Next slide, please. So the baseline assessment, here's some headline things that it's identified. It's useful for you to appreciate where the economy currently sits as well. Overall, the economy for Oxfordshire has been less hard hit than other parts of the UK, but it does expose some key challenges we face. The visitor economy, comprising tourism, hospitality, retail, leisure, arts, culture, heritage, those customer-facing roles and industries have been the most substantially hit. And there has been a major structural challenge for that sector that lockdown has brought forward, but maybe has accelerated from what was already happening in society, particularly in terms of online trading, for example, amongst other things. It's also identified challenges where the sector needs to think about technology adoption, amongst other things as well. From a labour market point of view, unemployment has been gone up substantially, but from a historical low. We were at virtual full employment prior to COVID, but it's also leveled off during the autumn. One of the things we need to be bearing in mind is how the economy responds as the furlough scheme tapers down after April and later into the summer as well. Amongst the things that we also found from the data was that there's variations across the county in terms of the impact COVID has had on the local labour market. There's been greater exposure and challenge for areas around Cherwell and Oxford City, but other districts have fared better and have been able to sustain their business operations. The projections that the baseline assessment has identified are for a short contraction in the economy and output over the course of 2020 and 2021, but a much more aggressive and substantial recovery thereafter, illustrating the underlying strengths of our economy, but also potentially where businesses start to reinvest at pace and that they're able to ensure that they have the right skills within their labour market and workforce that they can draw on as well. A few observations also on apprenticeships, where young people have been, of course, challenged as well by the COVID pandemic. We saw a substantial drop in apprenticeship numbers in the first part of the lockdown in between March and the summer of 2020. That started to gradually pick back up, but there has been some vulnerabilities. We're at somewhere in the region of about 80% of where we were previously. But I think what the challenge is also highlighted, however, is that the business economy was one of the biggest employers of apprenticeship places at all levels. And it's going to be interesting how those potential starts are built back, or in some cases replaced, as the businesses cease to take on apprenticeships or offer any further opportunities beyond this current cohort as well. And that's one of the challenges that we want this program to look at as well, and how we increase and widen access and pathways for young people into the new exciting roles that are being created through the dynamic economy Oxfordshire has. And amongst other things that we want to do in this process as well is understand what the baseline exposed, and that was in particular that whilst there was structural challenges for the economy but limited job losses in some areas, it did expose issues that the Oxfordshire economy needs to address. There's particular issues around the need to increase investment in skills. There's a recognition that that the pandemic highlighted potential skills shortages or also vulnerabilities in particular businesses and sectors. There's also the need to invest significantly in technology. There's a noticeable number of sectors in Oxfordshire where a technology adoption remains relatively low, and that's impacting then on the ability of businesses to adapt to new market conditions and also to respond to changing consumer behaviours and patterns as well. And there's also significant opportunities that come with the challenges of climate change, and in particular greening the supply chain and improving businesses' position in reducing their carbon output as well. So there are a range of things that COVID has highlighted that we need to make sure our economy is moving forward on as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through some very quick slides now, which is some of the data, the underlying data that those headline points illustrate. This gives you an indication of where the unemployment claimant count is for Oxfordshire. You can see that it's substantially lower than the UK figures, but it has moved up at a certain level. The districts that comprise Oxfordshire sit in that map as well, and you can see the variations between the areas I mentioned, between Cherwell and Oxford, for example, and in the Vale of Whitehorse and South Oxfordshire. Next slide, please, Rob. And this is an illustration of how the patterns of take up a furlough have progressed over the course of 2020 up to the end of the calendar year, where you can see significant peaks in firms taking up furlough and then lowering back as the restrictions over the summer started to ease, and then some pick up again in the autumn as more businesses face further challenges as well, but predominantly well within the spectrum and average of the UK take-up rate as well. Rob, next. Now, I touched on the challenges the business economy have had. Now, this is an illustration of the dramatic fall in footfall in Oxford City. Now, this really matters to illustrate how businesses have suffered in terms of trade. It's interesting also that the staycation bounce that many places enjoyed during the course of the summer of last year weren't necessarily replicated here in Oxford. And that's probably because most staycation benefits were enjoyed by coastal areas or predominantly rural areas. City breaks and city destinations of the type that Oxford and its wider hinterland tends to attract did not see that, and that was probably because of concerns about crowd sizes and whether there was sufficient social distancing and other things. And that's had an impact then on the ability of this sector to trade and also attract customers as well. I think the other thing that's been impacting footfall has been obviously the absence of students in the city and around surrounding areas, and also the very sharp falls in international visitors that we enjoy a substantial proportion of, and those have been combining to impact on Oxford substantially more than other locations, including London and Cambridge as well. Next slide, please. And just illustrates the way in which Oxfordshire businesses have responded. This is a brief graph that shows how Oxfordshire companies have been taking up the business loans that the government set out, particularly the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme for small businesses and the bounce back scheme for micro businesses as well. By and large, most businesses across the county have been accessing average sized loans. The values are there for you to see on the right hand side, and they're broadly in line with what most firms in those sectors have been drawing down. Now, the big challenge is going to be over the course of this financial year, the rate at which businesses pay back and how many will default as well. And that will be one of the big issues that we are looking to get more analysis on. But it illustrates also that Oxfordshire companies have needed that lifeline over the course of the last 12 months in most sectors as well. Rob? And I touched on the overall projection for the economy, and this gives you an indication of how we anticipate that working. This projection has been developed by Cambridge Econometrics for us, and it illustrates the expectation of a relatively short but sharp contraction of jobs, but then a substantial recovery as well. And we expect the growth to catch up more or less on a par with what we were experiencing before COVID as well, which illustrates the underlying strengths. But what we think that illustrates also is that there'll be some adjustment between different industries, whereas some continue to see a decline and others will start to really accelerate and continue to expand at an exponential rate as well. Rob? So hopefully that gives you some labour market background and context. What we're going to spend a few minutes now on is talking a bit more detail about this call and what we are looking for from it in the context of what you've heard in the last 15 minutes or so. The call delivering a business investment in skills in Oxfordshire is sitting in the priority access 2 of the ESF framework, and it sits within the Skills for Growth program line. And in particular, it's under investment priority 2.2. And what we're looking for from this is specifically labour market relevant interventions that are going to improve the relevance of the education and training systems, and also to help improve pathways for young people and adults into jobs that are being created as well. There's a number of key strategic alignments that I think you need to really bear on and think about as part of preparing your tender. And there are 3 I think we would flag. First of all, it's very important that your proposal is supporting the ambitions that have been set out in the Oxfordshire Local Industrial Strategy and the Oxfordshire Investment Plan, in particular the ambitions for Oxfordshire to become a top 3 global innovation ecosystem, and to show how the skills system is going to work towards ensuring that opportunity comes to fruition as well. It's also important, I think, that you show that it meets the priorities that have been set out in the economic recovery plan, and how this intervention will also work with the grain in making sure the building back of the economy is supported through the programme. And then finally, we have the Oxfordshire Local Skills Plan that has been published, which sets out the way in which the Skills Board hopes to see the skills system adapt and respond. And I think it's going to be important also that proposals are working to support and align with the priorities that plan has set out as well. So the strategic framework for your proposal should be responding to those 4 key areas: the programme itself under the ESF, and then the strategic local alignment with these 3 fundamental areas that we are leading on as well. Next slide. And some things to consider within that, just to help you to maybe come to think. First of all, it's really important to look at and understand the Oxfordshire social contract, which is detailed in the investment plan and also reflected also in the recovery plan. The social contract is a concept that we are looking to develop and advance across a number of skills interventions. This will be one of those. And in particular, its objective is to make sure that Oxfordshire's residents, its young people, its communities, have a share in the prosperity that's been created by being part of a world-leading innovation ecosystem. We recognize that there is absolutely no future in creating an economy that has a glass dome around 20–30% of it and the rest of the economy pressed against it looking in. We want to make sure that every person in the county has the opportunity to access the jobs that are being created across these pioneering companies and who are going to be creating significant new employment, which replaces the sectors and jobs that are currently in decline as well. So amongst the things the social contract is aiming to do is increase business engagement and leadership in the skill system. There's a very strong desire and appetite across the business community, particularly in those sectors I've just mentioned and the technologies, for strong leadership and engagement. There's a recognition in those businesses that they need to take a leading role in defining and shaping what skills is required and how that will support those particular industries and sectors. So we want to see strong business engagement. We want to see how you're going to support and connect local people to these opportunities and these new technologies that I've touched on and spoken about. And also critically, we also want to show the pathways that are going to be created to help young people access those jobs, working with businesses and ensuring that they have full access to those visionary opportunities that are out there on their doorsteps right now. The social contract is a really important statement of intent. So it is vital that the tender that comes forward and is successful is working in the spirit of that ambition and is seen as a key component of how we want to build the system and respond to the needs of the innovation ecosystem. Alongside that, there's also some important areas that we want to make sure is happening. We want to increase dramatically the number of SMEs, in particular small companies that are investing in skills. There continues to be a challenge for many of these firms, particularly post-COVID, where they're trying to stabilize their operations. And often the skills investment planning sometimes is a secondary thought. However, what COVID has highlighted is that a strong workforce enables a business to be much more agile in securing opportunities in new markets and also adapting to new technologies. And so we want to see how you will increase and support businesses to invest in skills and take up a key role in facilitating that. We also want to see support in building back sectors that have been impacted by COVID, in particular those areas that have been substantially affected by some of the lockdowns, and of course the visitor economy is one of those. But we want to see those sectors respond in a proactive, positive way, adopting new technology, looking at how they can embrace new forms of consumer and customer expectations as well, and how they respond to that as well. We want to see, for example, arts and cultural organizations think about how the new customer experience will need to be, how they consume new content. And that's something the challenges that those sectors are going to need to do and develop new skills for as well. We want to see in your proposals a way in which technology is maximized to support and boost business growth and to adopt new technology and innovation that will help businesses succeed. And then most critically of all, we want to see you bring forward creativity and innovation in the way in which things are delivered or services are delivered. One of the things we're really excited by under this tender is to see how providers can respond to the new landscape, respond to the new normal, as some people like to describe it. What delivery patterns need to be developed that now respond to that situation? Business as usual is clearly something that can't continue. So we're really excited to see what new ideas you come forward with that are going to ensure you connect businesses and also local people and help them into employment in particular sectors that are now very technology rich, have different forms of access, and will be working at different levels of market share across different industries as well. So a number of those things are going to be quite key in what we see coming forward as well. I'm going to hand over next to my colleague Joanna Wright, who's going to talk to you now about some specific technical matters that you need to bear in mind as part of your tender, and then we'll come back to share final comments before we open up for Q&A as well. So if there are any questions, please continue to put them into the chat bar or direct to Rob, and he will pick those up and share on those as well. I'll hand over to Jo now.
Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed, for that update around what the area are looking for. As Ahmed pointed out, my purpose of today is to really talk you through the process of applying for the funding, and to help to give you some sort of tips and some advice that will start you on this journey. So I've got the criteria on the slide, which I'm going to sort of fill out and give you more detail on. But as has already been pointed out, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to use the chat bar, and I'll do my best to answer them for you today, or if not today, then we can get back to you with an answer at a later stage. So the full application process and timetable. As you will have spotted, if you've already had a look at the call, the deadline for full applications is at midnight on the 14th of June, so about 6 weeks away from now. To apply for funding underneath this call, you need to have access to the eClaim system, which is the platform that we use for everything to do with ESF funding in the European Social Fund. So what I would say is please make sure that you have obtained access to that before the deadline. We would suggest at least 2 weeks, but actually it's worth doing it now to get you familiar with the whole process around eClaims, because that's where you'll need to load your application form onto. The details for how to get access to eClaims is embedded as part of the call, but it's literally just emailing an email address. You'll have a form that will come back again. It's a simple sort of form to complete that will gain you the access onto the system. Yourself and anybody else that you think in your organisation could have use of it. And from there, you'll be able to sort of copy and paste sort of from Word into specific parts of your application. You can save that as you go along, and it's not until you've actually pressed submit at the end that the application is locked and you can do no more on. So for reasons of technicality, understanding what you need to do, and just to make sure that you can sort of lock and load as you go along, it's worth getting access to that system sooner rather than later. That is the timetable. The timetable and the deadline of midnight on the 14th of June is set. If it's 1 minute past midnight, we can't accept it. One of the things with European Social Fund is we're very much governed by rules and regulations, and that's one of the regulations that we need to adhere to. So please do make sure that you're very mindful of that deadline. So once we've received your full application, what then happens is that application goes into the appraisal system as part of European Social Fund. So I'm just going to talk you through a little bit around that appraisal to give you an understanding of what happens, and through there to build some tips that you might want to bear in mind. So the full application is there to capture all of the information on the rationale, the activities, the cost, and the compliance of the proposal that you're putting forward. And it's the key component that we use to do the appraisal process. So for that purpose, applications should be really focused and avoid the temptation to pad out your application with lots of sort of fluff and lots of sort of buzzwords. This is actually a real person who's going to be working on your application and needs to be able to understand when they read through what it is that you're driving at, and to be able to pick out pertinent bits. So I'd say one of the key sort of pitfalls is sometimes people feel they need to have a really full and fancy application. Sometimes that can make it harder for us to pick out the bits that we specifically need. So make sure it's very focused. As you go through your application, you will see that there's various different criteria that we're looking at. So just make sure for any information that you put on the application, wherever applicable, you back that up with evidence. So if, say, for example, you're saying that there's been research in the area that suggests X, Y, Z, you will just need to reference that data for us so that we can have evidence to back up so what you said on there. And that will sort of save time through the appraisal process. So when we first get an application, the first thing we do is to go through what's called a gateway check. And that basically is to check that the fundamentals of the proposal are there. So the first thing is it's compliant against the European Social Fund eligibility rules. which you'll find access to on gov.uk. The second is, as Ahmed has already suggested, that it fits in with what the area is looking for. So we'll have a look at the call, and we'll have a look at the ESF strategy, and we'll have a look at the economic recovery plan and all of the documents which are referenced in the call to make sure that it fits against there. Once we've got a tick on that box to say yes, it's fitted in to that gateway criteria, it then moves on to the full appraisal. So through the full appraisal, we use a scoring system within European Social Fund, and we do that with various different sections of the application. So we're looking at strategic fit, and that is from a national basis, but also from a local level. And we're also looking at value for money from those two aspects as well. So that will be around your pounds, shillings and pence, around the unit cost that you're proposing, and your conversion unit cost for what you're proposing around the deliverables. But also for both of those areas, the strategic fit and the value for money, we'll also look for local ESF committee advice. And the reason for that is because your appraiser will be a national appraiser and won't necessarily understand all the intricacies of the Oxfordshire LEP area and what they're driving for. So to give you a little bit more information on the ESF committee, it's made up from local stakeholders in the Oxfordshire LEP area. They'll be from all of the sectors, so they could be from local authorities, from private sector, from the voluntary sector, and basically everybody who's a member will have access to the application appraisal and will be able to feed back on locally how well that fits. So it will include some data or some detail that maybe you haven't included within your application. And it could be if we have a lot of applications and the amount of applications exceed the amount of money that's available in the call, those applications will be competitive. So it may be that we need to pick one or some of the applications that are in rather than being able to fund all of them. So really purposeful, those two areas around the local as well as the national fit. We're also having a look at deliverability and management and control. So this is very much around what you're doing to fit in around the rules and regulations of the European Social Fund, and how you're going to be monitoring that you're doing that, not just at the application stage, but throughout the life of the project. We'll also be looking at 3 key areas of compliance. So they are procurement, if you're going to be procuring as part of your application or as part of your project, and we have a lot of work that we need to do around there. There's something called state aid, which if you're not familiar with, again, there's lots of information on gov.uk, and also around publicity. So one of the things that European Social Fund are really keen on is making sure that the logo is available sort of everywhere that it should be, to link the project that you'll be running sort of with the funding that's available through Europe. There's also 2 cross-cutting themes which are very pertinent. So one of those is sustainability, and the second of those is equality and diversity. So you'll be asked for information around how you plan your project plans to adhere to both of those as part of the application process. So I mentioned the scoring for European Social Fund applications. Each of those criteria that I've just given you will be scored out of a maximum score of 7. And in order to achieve a pass in each individual area, there needs to be a minimum score of 3. So if anything is scored under 3, it basically doesn't fit the bill and will be rejected. But obviously sort of anything from 3 above would mean that it would pass. And as well as looking at a 3 as a minimum score for any of those areas, we're also looking for an overall score of 42.8% or above. So that is a score of 57 in total. So while you could have a couple of areas that would sort of score less than 3, it can't be a 3 across the board. There does have to be some stronger areas than a 3 in order for it to pass. So that sounds a little bit complicated, but the reason that I wanted to bring that out was just to sort of say no application is perfect. We appreciate at this point you're working from what you know at this stage, and it could well be that European Social Fund is something that's quite new to you, can appear quite daunting and quite scary, but don't feel you have to be on the button with everything at this stage. You can drop a couple of points on an appraisal and still sort of receive the funding that you want. And the second part of how we work with you with that, I'll come on to at a later stage around the contracting and delivery. But just sort of really to explain to you what happens to your application after that point. Timescales, we are looking that as soon as the call is closed, within a week the gateway appraisal is done, so we can sort of factor in sort of any applications that haven't achieved that gateway criteria right from the start. And then from that point, we're looking for around about a 16-week turnaround to be able to get your application to the final decision stage. And the reason for that 7 weeks is because you'll see as you walk through the application that there's a lot of input that needs to be made into that. And as a result of that, the appraiser will need some time to work through it. And also we'll come backwards and forwards to ask you some questions around your application where there's any areas that are grey or that sort of need some further development on your part. So it could be that there's an area that we've got enough to pass gateway, but there's not enough to give it the minimum score at this stage. So the appraiser will come to you with some questions, will give you a deadline in order to come back with those answers or possibly to make some tweaks to your application. So it's backwards and forwards very much at that stage. And I think that the reason for wanting to bring that up is that we obviously need to make sure that the application that we've got from you adheres to all the eligibility criteria, but we're very much there to work with you. We want your project to be funded, we want it to succeed for sort of England, but also for the OxLEP area. So we'll do a maximum of 3 rounds of questions with every applicant, and at the end of those 3 rounds, if we've needed to use 3 rounds, whichever point we're at, that is the information that we use to make the final decision. So sometimes it can be a little bit longer than 16 weeks because if you need an extension to a deadline, for example, or if you've got a particularly complex proposal, then it may be a little bit longer, but that's kind of the average that we're looking at. And again, the reason for bringing that up is because it might be that the call closes in June and you're thinking, I want to start in July, but realistically, if you wanted to start in July, you're going to be starting at your own risk because we're not going to be able to have you a decision as to whether we're going to fund you or not at that stage. So I hope that's clear, but please feel free to sort of bring up any questions if not. Just wanted to talk quickly through the core outputs. So you'll notice that there is minimal core outputs for this particular call. So we've got a number of supported micro, small and medium-sized enterprises which are supported directly from the project. And that includes any social enterprises. So just to bring up at this point, the category of SMEs in this case is fewer than 250 persons and which have an annual turnover not exceeding €50 million. So there is some criteria there around the small and medium enterprises. Please do make sure that you take that into account when you're looking at who your target audience would be. That is the main output for this particular call, but because very much when you're working with the SMEs, you're going to be working with individual people, we're also asking you to give us some information on the total participants, the total individual people you're going to be working with through that activity with the small and medium enterprise. And they're literally the 2 areas that we're looking for with the outputs. With the results that we're looking for from this, it is the number of SMEs who have successfully completed the project. So this will be evidenced through more employers have become engaged as a result of the provision, or that the project has got a number of people progressing within a skills provision as a result of the intervention that you've given. So quite simple when it comes to the outputs and results, but please do be mindful of those, and again you'll find links to specific criteria around those on gov.uk. I wanted to talk a little bit around the match funding, because this may be something that's new to some of you. The way that match funding works with the European Social Fund in the OxLEP area is that 50% of the funding that's granted to any project needs to be matched with 50% of funding from the project. So the criteria around that is that all expenditure must be able to be evidenced, it must be auditable, and it must be defrayed prior to the inclusion in any claim. So bear those in mind when you're thinking about your match. Match can either come from public or from private funding, and the core criteria for it is that it needs to be related specifically to the project, so it can't be something that is for an entirely different purpose than the project that you want to relate it to. It needs to be clean, and that means that it can't come from any other European programmes or be drawn from any other European funding. And as I mentioned already, it needs to be auditable, so it needs to be something that you can show us where that money's come from. There is in the gov.uk, as part of the eligibility rules, you'll find there's some more definitions around match funding, but what I would say is have a look at those, put your proposal forward as part of your application, and your appraiser will work with you around it. If you have key questions around match beforehand, there is a central European Social Fund inbox, and they will send through any queries around match to our policy team to try and get you a definitive answer before your application goes forward. So I know that can be a real key starting point for some people. If you have queries after today around your match, or even if it's something quite technical today around match, I would say make the use of that inbox and they'll be able to give you a more definitive answer. Finally, because I know we're running short of time, but just to talk a little bit around contracting and delivery. So I mentioned about the appraiser working with you as part of getting you to that contract stage. If you are successful and your project is contracted, you will then be allocated a contract manager who will carry on working with you around sort of all of the sort of different difficulties that can come with European social funding. So if you are sort of feeling a little bit overwhelmed by some of the wealth of information that's out there, there is help there for you, and the role of the contract manager is very much to keep you on the straight and narrow when you're running the project. So it's very easy to sort of feel like you're slipping off of some of that eligibility, but for each of your quarterly claims and even in between, you'll have a contract manager who will work with you. So I think that's probably all that I wanted to say in sort of full, aware that we've only got 10 minutes left and there may well be some questions. I'll hand back to Ahmed.
Thank you, Jo. And just to finally finish off before we open up the floor, the resources for you to help put your tender together are there in plentiful detail. In addition to the details that Jo has just talked you through, which are on the .gov website with ample information on the technical briefing and also information on match funding and all the other areas around putting your proposal together. That's on the .gov website. There is also resourcing on the OxLEP website, including all of the documents and strategic plans that I mentioned at the start of the briefing as well. Things like the economic recovery plan, the economic baseline document, the local skills plan, and also the LIS and the Oxfordshire investment plan as well. Those are all available at the OxLEP website on the link that you can see on your screen at the moment, which is in the publications section of the website. If you go to the main homepage, you look at the top, you'll see a tab for publications, click on that, and then you'll see the full list of strategic documents that you need to consult and make sure your proposal fits around as well. And as I said, do look at the .gov website as well. That provides you with the technical data that you will need from the managing authority as well. So that concludes our briefing. We've got about 10 minutes for any questions or queries or clarifications. And if we can't help you in that time, we'll certainly come back to you with a more detailed response offline as well. You can see Rob, you can see he's a real person, not a robot. And he's going to just let us know if there are any queries. If there's not, no problem. But Rob, anything to...
Yeah, thanks Ahmed, thanks Jo, a really informative session. Because it was so so interesting and informative, we actually have no questions. There were a couple of comments in terms of where can the information be found in terms of supporting documentation and Oxfordshire-based strategies. Obviously, we've covered that at the end of the presentation. I guess I'm conscious that this particular webinar too is a valuable resource for people on the call today, and obviously organisations looking to get involved who aren't here today. Just as a heads up, this webinar will go onto our YouTube site as soon as possible, hopefully later today, and we'll certainly send a notification across to all of you to access. We'll also create a section on our OxLEP website too, so you can access this directly without having to go through YouTube. Also, there were requests with regards to the slides. Obviously, they're part of the webinar, but we'll ensure that a PDF version is also uploaded to that particular section. That has prompted some questions to come through, so I am going to ask these on the hoof, and they'll probably be actually verbatim. So first one is, I'm guessing in terms of the response, does this need to align with the DFE's skills accelerator?
So that's been announced very recently, and there are discussions going on within the local colleges on how that will be responded to. So I think what I would advise is make sure you are fitting in with the strategic framework of this call, first of all, because I know that the Skills Accelerator projects are also looking at how they respond to local needs. So my anticipation is that those projects will need to fit with the framework we've set out here for Oxfordshire as well.
Thanks, Ahmed. And then a follow-up question as well is, will this need to also align with the new local skills improvement plans as well? I'm guessing it's probably the same answer, Ahmed.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Sorry, I'm just conscious we're sharing my screen. Okay. Excellent. I think those are all of the questions that have been asked. As I say, we will ensure that the webinar is uploaded to YouTube in due course and send you a notification. Hopefully it is a valuable resource to everyone that's been on the call today. And yes, if there's any further questions, we'll ensure that contact details are put on that page too.
That's excellent.
Sorry, Rob, can I just add a little bit around
Sure.
the information, a couple of questions. Just to say, when the appraiser is looking at appraising the application, they are literally going to be looking at it against the call and against the operational programme for the European Social Fund. But any additional things that have happened in between that you might want to reference is absolutely fine, but it's not going to be a key criteria for the appraiser. So if you do align to those, that's fine. But you need to also make sure that you are really clear on aligning to all the things that are referenced within the call.
Excellent, thank you. No further questions have come through, Ahmed, so I'll hand back to you to close.
That's great. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Joe, as well, for your input. And we hope everyone who's been on the call today has had enough information to help prepare their proposals. It's a substantial part of our recovery work and supporting the skill systems. It's a very important program that we're looking to contract for. If there are any questions or any clarifications, then please do get in touch. All the resources, as Rob has just mentioned, will be on our site, including links to the .gov website that Joe has talked about and all the components that sit there as well. Thank you again, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye all.